調查報告嚟到去發表嘅。首先，我哋會講一講有關於路旁殘疾人士專用泊車位嘅措施同埋使用情況。而第二個嘅主要調查報告咧，就有關於教育局對於智障兒童學校宿舍部嘅監管。咁今日為我哋主持呢一個新聞發佈會嘅係我哋嘅申訴專員趙慧賢女士，將時間交俾趙專員。
好，各位早晨。我哋今日公布嘅主動調查呢，係有關於路旁殘疾人士專用泊車位嘅措施同埋使用情況。運輸署喺香港各區呢，係設有只供殘疾人士專用嘅路旁泊車位。呢一啲泊車位呢，以往只係俾持有傷殘人士泊車許可證，俗稱藍證嘅傷殘駕駛者免費使用嘅。喺2021年1月29號開始呢，運輸署呢就將有關泊車位嘅使用資格呢擴展到持有司機接載行動不便嘅殘疾人士泊車證明書，俗稱灰證嘅人士。而佢哋駕駛車輛進入或者離開路旁專用泊車位嘅時候呢，必須係接載指定嘅下肢肢體行動不便嘅殘疾人士。運輸署實行咗上述新嘅措施之後呢，灰證嘅申請數量大幅上升，直至到2022年11月，運輸署一共簽發咗1703張有效嘅藍證同埋2729張灰證。相對於現時全港只係有522個路旁專用泊車位呢，新措施下相關泊車位供不應求嘅情況更加嚴重，而路旁專用泊車位涉嫌被濫用嘅情況呢，亦都有所增加。我哋認為運輸署推出新措施呢，係考慮到殘疾人士嘅出行需要，促進佢哋融入社區，並且係支援同埋減輕照顧者嘅負擔，本意係良好嘅。不過喺訂立藍證同埋灰證嘅背景同埋制度並唔相同，而且兩者喺審批準則同罰則上邊亦都存有差異。我哋調查發現呢，運輸署係未有理順相關嘅差異，同埋深入去評估實際推行新措施嘅時候所遇到嘅問題，以致佢哋喺制定措施嘅過程、評估泊車位供應嘅情況、審批申請、防止同打擊濫泊行為4個方面都有不足。以下我會講解下當中嘅重點。首先係運輸署係基於2019年一宗申請司法覆核許可嘅個案而實行新措施嘅。推出新措施之前呢，係冇進行過任何嘅公眾諮詢或者係收集持份者意見嘅工作。制定新措施嘅過程透明度不足，令到受影響嘅人士對新措施呢產生負面嘅觀感。另一方面呢，運輸署喺實施新措施之後幾個月，就已經修改灰證嘅審批準則，包括更改評估被接載者下肢傷殘情況嘅合資格人士身份，以及修訂灰證使用條件嘅表述。呢啲情況呢，都反映運輸署最初係未有仔細嘅考量執行新措施嘅細節，同預期可能出現嘅情況，而且喺短時間之內修改灰證嘅規定同埋使用條件，會令人無所適從，亦都容易產生誤會。第二方面係關於路旁專用泊車位嘅供求情況。根據運輸署提供嘅資料呢，喺新措施實施之後呢，路旁專用泊車位同兩種持證人嘅比例呢，由以往1:4呢升至1:8.5嘅。雖然運輸署正係增加專用泊車位嘅數目，但係就遠不及灰證持有人嘅增幅。我哋認為運輸署應該釐清設置路旁專用泊車位嘅政策方向，同埋充分嘅評估供求嘅情況，釐定有關泊位同埋持證人嘅目標比例，以此制定更加長遠嘅規劃同埋有關配套。 係有關於藍證同灰證嘅準則。藍證呢係根據道路交通泊車規例簽發嘅，申請人呢係需持有駕駛執照嘅合資格傷殘人士，而灰證嘅簽發呢只係屬於行政措施，運輸署呢可因應唔同嘅情況去調整相關嘅規定。藍證同灰證喺審批程序同埋申請嘅資格亦都係有分別嘅。以申請資格為例呢，基本上申請藍證嘅傷殘駕駛者呢，必須係有關車輛嘅登記車主，否則呢只可以接受由佢同屬係傷殘人士嘅配偶所擁有嘅車輛，而一張藍證呢只可以登記一架車輛。至於灰證呢，申請人同或者佢接載嘅下肢殘疾嘅人士都可以係登記車主，而一張灰證呢就可以登記多過一架嘅車輛，亦都冇硬性規定呢被接載者同申請人呢必須係有親屬嘅關係，令到灰證嘅審批程序變得複雜，不利當局對濫用路旁專用泊車位問題嘅監察同埋執管工作。我哋認為運輸署係有必要確保殘疾程度相若嘅下肢殘疾駕駛者同被接載者呢都享有同等嘅泊車便利，除非當局能夠將呢啲差異作具體同埋合理嘅解釋，否則呢運輸署係有需要呢採取措施消減呢啲差異，而減少藍證同埋灰證持有人對於使用路旁專用泊車位呢一方面嘅爭議。最後係有關於運輸署防止同埋打擊濫泊行為嘅工作。濫用路旁專用泊車位嘅情況呢，最主要係包括藍證同埋灰證持有人將車輛連續泊喺呢啲泊位裏邊呢超過24小時。而就灰證而言呢，有唔少個案呢就涉及持證者呢係使用呢啲路旁專用泊車位嘅時候呢係冇接載下肢殘疾嘅人士。我嘅同事一陣間呢會同大家講解一宗嘅個案，呢個個案呢就反映到運輸署喺處理收回灰證程序上有嚴重不足。另外呢，法例亦都清楚定明呢，藍證被取消之後呢係唔可以再喺車輛上展示嘅。如果持證人呢向運輸署退還有關證件呢，係有其責任同埋時限嘅。如果唔遵從嘅話呢，屬於違法，亦都可能會面對刑責。但係持灰證嘅人，如果因為違反使用條件呢，係唔會承受有關罰則嘅。基於以上嘅調查所得，我哋向運輸署提出咗11項建議，運輸署大致上接納咗我哋嘅建議。我亦都好高興見到部門呢已經採取措施跟進部分建議實施嘅情況。多謝。Today we will announce the finding of our direct investigation into measures and usage of on-street parking spaces designated for people with disabilities. The Transport Department, TD, has designated on-street parking spaces for people with disabilities in all districts throughout Hong Kong. In the past, only drivers with disabilities holding the Disabled Persons Parking Permit, commonly known as Blue Permit, were entitled to use those spaces for free. With effect from 29 January 2021, TD extended the eligibility for designated parking spaces to holders of parking certificate for drivers who carry people with mobility disabilities, commonly known as Grey Permit. When they drive a vehicle in or out of the designated parking space, the specified person with lower limb mobility disability must be on board. After the launch of the new measure, applications for Grey Permit have soared. As at November 2021, 1,703 Blue Permits and 2,729 Grey Permits were issued. Given that there are only 522 designated parking spaces across the territory, the new measure has aggravated the shortfall in the supply of designated parking spaces, and suspected abuse of the use of designated parking spaces is on the rise. We recognize that TD's new measure was well-intentioned to facilitate the traveling and social integration of people with disabilities, and to support and ease the burdens of carers. However, our investigation revealed that there are inadequacies in TD's formulation of the new measure, assessment of the supply and demand of the designated parking spaces, processing of applications, and measures to prevent and tackle abuse. I'm going to highlight some key points. First of all, TD introduced the new measure in the wake of an application for leave for judicial review in 2019. Before its launch, no public consultation had been conducted, nor had TD collected the view of stakeholders. The lack of transparency during the formulation process created a negative perception of the new measure among the parties affected. Besides, after launching the new measure for just a few months, TD revised the grey permits approval criteria, including the qualified persons for assessing the passenger's lower limb disability condition and its condition of use, reflecting that TD had not carefully considered the operational details and possible scenarios when formulating the new measure. Moreover, those changes made within a short time were confusing and could easily lead to misunderstanding. The second point is about the supply and demand of designated parking spaces. According to TD, the ratio of designated parking spaces to holders of blue permit and grey permit has increased from 1 to 4 to 1 to 8.5 after the launch of the new measure. Although TD is working towards increasing the supply of designated parking spaces, it lags far behind the increase of grey permit holders. We consider TD should clarify the policy direction of having designated parking spaces, fully assess the supply and demand, and set a target ratio of spaces to blue permit and grey permit holders for long-term planning and development of ancillary facilities. The third point is about the criteria of blue permit and grey permit. Blue permit is issued under the road traffic parking regulations, and the applicant is required to be a qualified disabled person holding a driving license. Grey permit is issued by administrative means, and TD can adjust the requirements according to circumstances. Blue permit and grey permit are also different in terms of approval procedures and eligibility criteria. Basically, the vehicle used for blue permit application must be registered in the name of the applicant or his or her spouse, where the spouse is also a disabled person. Only one vehicle is listed on each blue permit. As for grey permits, the vehicle can be registered in the name of the applicant or the passenger with lower limb disabilities. More than one vehicle can be registered on each certificate, and the applicant and passenger are not required to be related. This causes the approval procedures to become more complicated and is detrimental to the monitoring and enforcement against abuse of designated parking spaces. While we consider it essential for TD to ensure that people with comparable level of lower limb disability, either as drivers or passengers, are equally entitled to parking concessions, TD should provide specific and reasonable explanation for these discrepancies or alleviate them as far as possible to avoid disputes between blue permit and grey permit holders about the right to use the designated parking spaces. Finally, I will talk about TD's measure to prevent and tackle parking abuse. According to the relevant ordinance, after a blue permit is cancelled, the holder should cease to display it on the vehicle and surrender it to TD within a time limit. Violating these statutory requirements is an offence and is subject to penalties. However, grey permit holders are not liable to penalties for non-compliance with the condition of use. In light of our findings, we have made 11 recommendations to TD. TD has in general accepted all our recommendations. I'm glad that it has already introduced measures for implementation of some recommendations. Thank you. 跟住我會將時間交俾負責呢個主動調查嘅高級調查主任潘順蓮。
係，唔該專員。各位早晨，今日我要報告嘅主動調查係有關路旁殘疾人士專用泊車位嘅措施同埋使用情況。我會先講解一下個案嘅背景資料，之後會有本處嘅調查所得同埋建議。 為咗協助殘疾人士融入社會，政府早年向殘疾駕駛者提供便利佢哋駕駛同埋泊車嘅安排。除咗喺政府停車場同埋路旁設置殘疾駕駛人士專用嘅泊位之外，運輸署亦都會喺殘疾人士常到嘅設施附近，例如醫院，設置路旁專用泊位，以應付佢哋嘅短期泊車需要。政府喺1992年修訂道路交通條例同埋相關嘅附屬法例，合資格嘅傷殘人士喺獲簽發有效嘅駕駛執照同埋車輛牌照之後，就可以申請同埋獲簽發傷殘人士泊車許可證，俗稱藍證。就泊車而言，持有藍證嘅殘疾駕駛者可以免費使用路旁專用泊位同埋一般收費嘅路旁停車位，亦都可以半價使用運輸署轄下停車場嘅專用泊位。至於司機接載行動不便的殘疾人士證明書，俗稱灰證，就源於運輸署喺2002年3月推出嘅一項試驗計劃。計劃最初容許殘疾人士嘅父母同埋配偶喺接載有關人士嘅時候，可以將車停泊喺政府停車場殘疾人士專用泊位，而持證人係需要繳付泊車費用。2004年試驗計劃成為永久嘅安排，至到2014年4月，灰證適用範圍擴展至到容許持證人可以接載親屬以外嘅行動不便人士。喺2021年嘅1月29日，運輸署就擴大路旁專用泊位嘅使用資格，容許灰證持有人喺接載指定嘅下肢殘疾人士嘅時候都可以使用有關泊位。我哋都收到唔少公眾人士同埋團體嘅意見同埋投訴，佢哋指出新措施實施之後，令到兩個問題更趨嚴重。第一就係路旁專用泊位供不應求，第二就係有關泊位被濫用。截至到2022年11月，本港約有522個路旁專用泊位，而運輸署就一共簽發咗1703張藍證同埋2729張灰證。新措施實施之後，路旁專用泊位同埋持證人嘅比例就由以往1:4增加至到1:8.5。新措施實施後嘅1年期間，即係2021年嘅2月至到2022年嘅2月，運輸署一共接獲咗23宗有關藍證嘅投訴，當中接近70%係涉及持證人將車連續停泊喺有關嘅泊位超過24小時。而同期涉及灰證嘅投訴就有142宗，當中超過一半涉及持證人喺使用路旁專用泊位時候未有接載下肢殘疾人士。就使用路旁專用泊位嘅情況，我哋曾經參考英國、加拿大、新加坡同埋台灣嘅安排。以英國為例，當地就唔會區分傷殘駕駛者同埋殘疾乘客，只要車輛接載持有傷殘停車證嘅殘疾人士，就可以使用專用泊位，而濫用傷殘停車證係刑事罪行。至於新加坡，接載殘疾人士嘅已登記車輛可以停泊喺專用泊位，但係限時就係1個鐘。喺呢一次嘅主動調查，我哋認為運輸署有4個方面嘅不足。第一係喺制定新措施嘅過程方面，我哋調查發現，運輸署制定同埋實施新措施係基於一宗申請司法覆核許可嘅個案，亦因為咁，運輸署係冇進行任何嘅公眾諮詢，亦都冇收集持份者嘅意見，因此制定過程嘅透明度不足，令到受影響人士對新措施產生負面嘅觀感。另外，我哋留意到運輸署喺實施新措施期間曾經倉卒咁更改灰證嘅規定同埋使用條件。喺新措施實施之前，灰證嘅申請人可以提供由醫生、物理治療師、特殊學校校長同埋護士簽發嘅文件，證明所接載嘅人士為下肢殘疾人士。新措施實施初期，運輸署仍然沿用有關嘅做法。而喺新措施實施之後不足半年，運輸署就修訂咗有關要求。只係接受由醫生或者物理治療師簽發嘅證明文件，並且需要列明被接載人士殘疾情況可能持續嘅時期。另外，運輸署亦都更改咗灰證使用條件嘅表述，由以往容許灰證持有人可以喺路旁專用泊位泊車，到依家要求灰證持有人駕駛已經獲批准嘅車輛進入及或離開泊位嘅時候，車上必須載有批准信上面所列明嘅下肢殘疾人士。我哋認為運輸署喺新措施實施之後幾個月就修訂使用條件，反映佢哋未有仔細考量執行細節同埋預計可能出現嘅情況。第二方面嘅不足係有關於路旁專用泊位嘅供求情況。 數據顯示，新措施實施之後，可以使用路旁專用泊位嘅殘疾人士數量大幅增加，但每個人可以使用嘅機會就減少。路旁專用泊位不設收費，亦都冇任何登記或者停泊記錄嘅要求，難以確定車輛有冇超時停泊。我哋認為運輸署需要釐清設置路旁專用泊位嘅政策方向，充分評估供求情況，以制定更加長遠嘅規劃。另外，根據運輸署嘅資料，喺推出新措施之前，運輸署曾經就住路旁專用泊位嘅使用率進行調查，但就冇發放相關嘅數據。我哋認為開放有關嘅數據有助於提升政府施政同埋運作等方面嘅透明度。第三項嘅不足係關於藍證同埋灰證嘅準則。由於訂立藍證同埋灰證嘅制度同埋背景唔同，令到兩者喺審批程序同埋申請資格都有差異。藍證係根據《道路交通泊車規例》以下簡稱規例簽發，法例嘅條文對於申請條件係有所規限；而灰證嘅簽發就屬於行政措施，運輸署可以因應唔同嘅情況調整相關規定。而呢啲差異亦都引申咗以下落嚟嘅問題。第一個問題就係申請人、登記車主同埋被接載者嘅關係。根據規例，申請藍證嘅傷殘人士或者係佢同為傷殘人士嘅配偶，必須係有關車輛嘅登記車主。至於灰證，申請人或者佢接載嘅行動不便殘疾人士，必須擁有以佢本人姓名登記嘅車，所以申請人唔一定係登記車主。而被接載嘅下肢殘疾人士，即使無法駕駛，亦都可以係登記車主。政府喺2014年容許灰證嘅持有人接載親屬以外嘅行動不便人士嘅時候，只可以將車停泊喺政府多層停車場嘅專用泊位，但就唔包括路旁專用泊位。由於當時灰證嘅適用範圍有限，所以運輸署冇就住申請人同被接載者嘅關係設定限制。不過，由於新措施容許咗灰證持有人免費使用路旁專用泊位，就大幅增加咗對有關泊位嘅需求。我哋認為運輸署有必要探討係咪仍然沿用舊有偏向寬鬆嘅標準審批申請。另外，現時藍證持有人只係會駕駛一部指定嘅登記車輛，灰證嘅情況就唔同。如果被接載者係登記車主，而佢唔能夠依靠單一駕駛者接載呢，就可以由多位申請人向運輸署提出申請。另外，運輸署現時接受申請灰證嘅車輛以註冊公司或者機構名義登記，亦都會令到審批程序變得更為複雜。喺我哋審研嘅其中一宗個案，申請人同被接載者並非登記車主，但運輸署因應個案嘅特殊情況，引述批准簽發灰證俾申請人。運輸署接受申請人以其他人嘅車輛申領灰證，同原來列明嘅申請資格係不相符。我哋認為運輸署需要認真檢視灰證嘅申請資格，特別係灰證嘅申請人、登記車主同埋被接載者係不同人士，而牽涉到授權他人駕駛嘅安排。而如果運輸署因率或者酌情審批個別嘅申請，就需要清楚講明考慮嘅因素，並且訂定審批嘅條件同埋準則。第二個引申問題呢，就係運輸署冇清楚訂明每張灰證可以登記車輛嘅數目。運輸署係冇就住車輛數目設定上限，現時就有一宗個案獲批准最多5架登記車輛。我哋留意到現時大部分登記3架或以上車輛嘅灰證申請人冇解釋增加車輛數目嘅原因，運輸署唔會探究，亦都冇講明簽發俾最多5架登記車輛嘅理據。運輸署有必要就住灰證可以登記車輛嘅數目釐定統一嘅標準，並就住處理涉及多輛車輛嘅申請制定相關嘅程序指引。第三個問題呢，就係運輸署冇規定車輛嘅種類同埋款式。就藍證而言，規例就指明咗車輛嘅種類，即係私家車、電單車或者機動三輪車，但就冇限制款式。至於灰證，運輸署就冇限制車輛嘅型號或者款式。我哋認為運輸署對灰證嘅申請採取較為寬鬆嘅處理，咁樣係會導致藍證同埋灰證申請嘅車輛種類存有差異。運輸署應該加強審視有關申請，就住灰證持有人可以使用嘅車輛種類，制定合理嘅標準。第四項嘅不足呢，係防止同埋打擊濫泊行為嘅措施。同一般路旁停車位一樣，藍證同埋灰證持有人都係唔可以將車停泊喺路旁專用泊位超過24小時。使用條件方面，藍證持有人可以免費使用路旁專用泊位，而灰證嘅持有人只可以喺接載下肢殘疾人士嘅時候使用。 我哋嘅調查發現，有部分灰證持有人將車駛入路旁專用泊位時，確實係有接載下肢殘疾人士。其後有關殘疾人士係冇返去個泊位登車，而車輛仍然長時間停泊。雖然佢哋冇違反使用條件，但情況就唔理想。運輸署又需要探討制定使用路旁專用泊位限制嘅可行性，以增加泊位嘅流轉。另一方面，我哋認為運輸署喺投訴個案嘅調查同埋跟進工作方面欠缺系統。喺接獲有關灰證持有人喺使用路旁專用泊位時冇接載到殘疾人士嘅投訴之後，運輸署又係會去信要求持證人解釋。除咗檢視投訴人提供嘅照片同埋錄像之外呢，亦都會就住部分嘅個案進行調查。如果確認灰證遭濫用，運輸署就會向首次違規嘅持證人發出警告信。如果確認灰證再次遭濫用呢，有關人士嘅灰證就會被取消。喺我哋審研嘅個案入面，我哋留意到有灰證嘅持有人承認2度濫用灰證，但運輸署未趕及喺持證人首次違規之後發出警告信。最終都只係向持證人發出警告信，而唔係取消佢哋嘅灰證。另外，亦都有部分被投訴嘅灰證持有人冇喺部門鎖定嘅期限之前就住濫泊嘅指稱作出解釋。我哋認為運輸署應該檢視現行處理濫泊嘅程序。新措施實施之前，運輸署進行嘅調查結果顯示，路旁專用泊位喺週6同埋週日嘅使用率同平日相若。新措施實施之後，運輸署會定期喺高使用率同埋較多接獲市民舉報嘅路旁專用泊位一帶進行調查。不過，部門嘅調查大多數喺平日進行。運輸署有必要增加週6同埋週日嘅調查次數，以更全面了解路旁專用泊位嘅實際使用情況。我哋喺今次嘅調查留意到運輸署喺收返灰證安排上面欠妥善。以下落嚟，我會用一宗個案，即係調查報告裡面嘅個案3去解釋有關情況。兩名申請人呢係獲運輸署簽發同一張灰證，以下簡稱灰證1，用以接載同一位下肢殘疾人士。其後，持證人新增第3位申請人登記另一架車去接載同一位下肢殘疾人士。運輸署再簽發另一張已經更新資料嘅灰證，以下簡稱灰證2。證件上係列明咗3架車嘅車牌號碼。之後，其中一名持證人因為濫用路旁專用泊位而被運輸署取消灰證。部門要求申請人喺指定期限裡面交返灰證，持證人就隨即提出上訴。期間，運輸署喺巡查嘅時候就發現灰證上面其中2架已經獲批准嘅車喺同一時段裡面分別停泊喺唔同嘅地區嘅路旁專用泊位，2架車分別展示咗灰證1同埋灰證2。上述嘅個案反映運輸署處理收返灰證嘅程序有嚴重嘅不足。就藍證而言，規例定明持證人喺接獲運輸署通知取消或者拒絕續期之後，如果屬於紙本嘅藍證，除咗唔可以喺車輛上面展示，亦都需要喺3日之內將藍證交返俾運輸署。唔遵守規定嘅人士可被罰款。至於灰證，由於安排只係屬於行政措施，即使持證人被取消灰證，而其後唔遵守相關嘅規定，亦都無需要承擔任何嘅法律後果，難免令人認為政策不公。另外，運輸署表示正係同電子泊車咪標嘅服務營辦商研究可行嘅方案，去加強監察路旁專用泊位嘅使用情況。不過，單靠新科技難以根治問題。運輸署有必要正視部門對於灰證持有人違規情況無法可執呢一個現實，加強對各種不當行為嘅規管。我哋認為運輸署亦都可以繼續探討其他防止同埋處理濫泊問題嘅可行方案，例如加強宣傳教育。而喺新科技應用方面，可以透過香港出行易應用程式發放路旁專用泊位使用情況嘅實時資訊，便令持證人隨時搜尋路旁專用泊位。運輸署亦都可以同持份者就住唔同嘅方案作出協調同埋取捨，以營造共識。基於以上嘅調查所得，我哋向運輸署提出共11項嘅改善建議，詳情大家可以參閱手上嘅報告摘要。今日我嘅報告係咁多，將時間交返俾主持。
接住落嚟係答問嘅時間。傳媒如果對於剛才個報告咧有提問嘅話，歡迎你舉起你嘅手，然後你講出你所代表嘅傳媒機構。
喂，testing 係兩位好，情報記者。其實想知咧即係如果係話查翻，即係調查翻話喺街上面嗰啲泊位嗰啲問題咧，其實警方係咪都有責任去跟進翻話，即係佢係咪話即係有啲藍證同灰證嘅車係濫用咗嗰啲泊位咧？警方對於呢樣嘢有冇啲咩特別嘅回應咧？另外就係話即係雖然就話係就個殘疾人士泊位就唔夠啦，就得500幾個啦。咁但係其實就香港整體嚟講係話，即係整體上面係話個泊位不足，都係一個問題。其實會唔會都係同呢個問題亦都係有關呢？唔該。
首先係有關於警方嘅責任嗰方面啦。咁喺執行呢一個道路安全道路規則泊位嗰方面呢，警方呢係一個呢個有佢嘅有佢嗰個工作係要，譬如話係抄牌啊咁樣。咁但係呢個問題呢，就係喺呢一個灰證嗰方面呢，頭先已經講咗啦，就係話如果佢係違反嗰個條例，係冇交翻譬如話已經係取消嘅呢個灰證俾翻呢個運輸處嘅話呢，其實呢喺法例上邊呢，佢係冇一個罰則嘅，就唔同藍證。藍證呢，佢本身呢，因為係有呢個法律嘅基礎，咁啊有佢嗰個罰則喺嗰方面。咁至於頭先講話咩警方有關於喺呢個執法嗰方面嗰個責任同埋佢有咩回應呢？因為警方呢，就唔係我哋呢一個公署調查嘅範圍之內嘅，係可以。咁所以呢，回應可能要問翻警方啦。有關於泊車位嗰方面呢，其實路旁專用泊車位呢，同時係涉及路旁專用泊車嘅政策同埋殘疾人士嘅交通政策。咁所以呢，就喺政策釐定嗰方面呢，就要有個平衡。亦都要呢，好似我哋頭先咁講啦，運輸署呢係需要呢定嗰個長遠嘅政策係咩嘢嚇，同埋呢釐定有關於呢一個特別嘅泊車位嗰個同持證人嗰個比例係點樣？整體上邊香港嗰個泊車位呢，其實都係不足嘅。香港政府呢，其實係推行呢一個公共運輸政策，咁所以呢，希望呢係所有駕駛者，無論係呢一個呢個殘疾人士啊，或者係健全人士呢，都係有機會呢，都係盡量係用呢一個公共運輸，而唔係揸車嘅。咁但係我哋都明白到呢個政策嘅目標呢，係希望呢殘疾人士呢，亦都可以呢便利佢哋出行，同埋呢係融入社會嘅。多謝。
係緊張呢一位。
Hello, a few questions from RTHK. So my first question is about the violation of grey permit holders. Would you say there should be some sort of penalties, some fines for those violations? Should it be aligned with the violations for people when they're using the blue permit? And my second question is about the possible abuse of grey permit holders. Because you said that in your investigation, there can be 5 vehicles registered under the same permit, the grey permit. Do you think there should be some sort of limit on the number of vehicles that can be registered under the same permit? Or, what would your suggestion be? Thank you.
In our report, we have recommended that in the long term, that the Transport Department should consider whether there is any need for legislative amendment to align the requirement and criteria of blue permit and grey permit. At the moment, blue permit is underpinned by a legislative framework, whereas grey permit is based on administrative measure. And hence, there is the discrepancy in terms of the eligibility as well as the penalty concern. So I think this discrepancy also created dispute amongst the permit holders as to the usage of the parking spaces. And hence, that is also within our recommendations, the legislative amendment. As for the possible abuse of listing more than one vehicle in the grey permit, and in one case we find that there are 5 vehicles put in one permit. According to the current policy, only one permit will be issued. The grey permit will be issued, even though there might be multiple vehicles being registered. So theoretically, only one grey permit can be used at a time. But we see that there are discrepancies in terms of the return of the either expired or cancelled permits, and hence there are duplication of such grey permits and used simultaneously in one abuse case. And also we find that there should not be unreasonable number of vehicles being permitted in one grey permit. There are no explanation as to why 5 vehicles needs to be included in one permit versus one vehicle included in one blue permit only. So this discrepancy also created a perception of unfairness. Thank you.
係呢邊呢一位女士。
你好，讀媒嘅。咁有3個問題。第一個咧就係車輛種類方面啦。咁報告就話有2%係客貨車，仲有單門跑車啦。咁想問下登記車種上高藍證同灰證係咪有好大分別嘅咧？專員有冇調查過呢啲客貨車係咪真係接載傷殘人士咧？第二咧就係除咗客貨車，係咪仲有其他唔常見嘅車種獲批灰證，即係例如大貨車？第三咧就係公署有冇調查有冇人去出售呢啲灰證咧？唔該。
有關於車輛嘅類別，我應該俾同事去講講啦。咁喺我哋嘅調查咧，最主要咧就係睇下運輸署喺發出呢一個灰證同藍證嗰方面嗰個機制啦，同埋咧佢哋打擊個濫用嗰個情況嘅。咁我哋咧就冇話去研究個別嘅個案係有冇呢一個售賣呢個咁嘅情況出現嘅。多謝。
係就住嗰個客貨車嘅資料咧，我哋就係調查咗係有2%係客貨車，但係如果你話大型嘅貨車咧，我哋手頭就冇呢方面嘅資料嘅。唔該。
係後面嗰一位。
兩位你好，商台㗎。公署份報告有提到話個流轉程度唔足夠啦，即係可唔可以都講一講，就係即係期望運輸署可能即係俾灰證持有人都使用呢一啲泊車位嘅時候，係咪即係嗰個比例降翻去同以往淨係容許藍證持有人使用車位個情況一致，先至即係可以解決到個供求嘅問題咧？即係最理想嘅比例。另外咧都想了解下咧，有一宗個案係佢即係接載殘疾人士上車，但係佢即係冇再返回車輛嘅嗰種個案，其實即係入面都有提到話佢係即係冇違反到現行嘅規例啦，即係會唔會都即係建議運輸署可能喺呢一方面即係個規例即係會定得再清楚啲啊？即係係咪一定要接即係去接去嗰度泊咗之後個殘疾人士要返回架車度先至為之可以使用呢一泊車位咧？唔該。
嗰個個案呢，應該我交俾同事講講啦。咁有關於運輸署推出呢個新措施呢，我哋覺得呢係考慮到殘疾人士嘅出行嘅需要，同埋促進佢哋融入社區嘅，同埋支援同埋減輕照顧者嘅負擔，本意係良好嘅。我哋亦都認為呢，無論呢佢係本身係殘疾人士，係駕駛者或者被接載者呢，都應該係得到相同嘅泊車便利嘅。咁所以咧，我就唔會睇到話有啲咩嘅話比例係需要去釐定喺呢一方面。但係咧，我哋發覺咧喺灰證嘅簽發嘅過程同埋準則同埋咧去打擊濫泊呢一方面咧，都係有不足之處嘅。最主要咧就係而家咧灰證係由行政措施底下去釐定呢一個成個計劃，亦都咧如果係濫用咧，睇唔到話係有咩嘅罰則。但係藍證嗰方面咧，就係因為係有呢一個立法嘅規定，而且濫用嘅話咧係需要負起刑責嘅。咁所以相關嘅差異咧，可能會製造咗一啲矛盾。咁呢一個咧就需要運輸署去正視啦， 同埋睇下點樣可以呢係盡量去消減咗呢啲嘅差異。多謝，我交俾同事。
係唔該。頭先咧，我講過嘅情況咧，就係話，因為而家灰證嗰個使用條件咧，係列明咗泊車證明書嘅持證人駕駛佢已經獲批准嘅車輛進入及或離開泊位嘅時候咧，車上必須要有泊車證上面證明書批准信上面嗰所列明嘅下肢殘疾人士嘅。咁所以嗰個個案咧，其實佢係如果泊咗車之後，佢係接載咗殘疾人士離開嘅時候咧，就反而個殘疾人士冇登車嘅話咧，其實喺嗰個使用條件嚟講咧，佢係冇違反嗰個規定嘅。不過我哋覺得個情況就唔理想嘅。唔該。
請問仲有冇其他問題？如果冇嘅話，我哋開始進入去另外一個嘅主動調查報告。大家手頭上有嘅係我哋嘅報告嘅摘要。如果想睇返成個報告嘅全部嘅內容呢，大家可以上網嗰度有整份報告嗰個嘅稿可以俾你下載落嚟嘅。接住落嚟嘅主動調查報告呢，係有關於教育局對於智障人士學校宿舍部嗰個監管。咁我哋將時間交俾趙專員。
好，大家好。今日我哋公布嘅主動調查呢，係有關於教育局對智障兒童學校宿舍部嘅監管。本港現時有17所智障兒童學校呢，係附設有宿舍部嘅，提供宿舍嘅服務俾有需要嘅中度同埋嚴重智障嘅兒童。宿舍部係由教育局資助，同其他資助嘅學校一樣。智障嘅兒童學校係包括宿舍部嘅日常運作呢，係由學校法團校董會以校本管理嘅方式去管理同埋營運嘅。教育局呢就會由唔同嘅層面去監管學校同埋宿舍部，確保學校嘅管治同埋運作符合相關法例同埋教育局嘅指引。寄宿智障兒童嘅日常起居呢，同埋醫療護理，往往係需要依賴其他人嘅協助嘅。而由於佢哋嘅表達能力有限，一旦喺宿舍部遇到問題，或者難以向家長或者其他人清晰咁説明情況，或者係表達不滿，我哋並不質疑個智障兒童學校宿舍部喺照料宿生嗰方面付出嘅愛心同埋艱辛，但係咧考慮到寄宿智障兒童嘅特殊情況，學校宿舍部嘅服務性質同埋安排呢，與一般學校係截然不同嘅。即使業界而家係普遍自律，但係唔代表政府當局喺監管責任嗰邊可以被忽視嘅。我哋理解到喺校本管理嘅政策底下呢，學校喺管理同埋營運上，包括宿舍部呢，有較大嘅彈性同埋自主權。但係教育局仍然需要加強監管智障兒童學校宿舍部嘅力度同埋嚴謹程度，以確保同埋提升智障兒童學校宿舍部嘅服務質素，減低寄宿智障兒童被疏忽或者虐待嘅風險。我哋嘅調查發現呢，教育局以往呢係未有積極發揮相關監管嘅機制效能，佢哋嘅工作仍然有改善嘅空間。以下我會講解下當中嘅重點。首先，我哋認為呢，教育局對智障兒童學校宿舍部日常運作嘅指引不足。以往呢，教育局未有針對智障兒童學校宿舍部嘅日常運作發出指引。雖然該局喺2021年3月呢係發出咗特殊學校策劃同埋管理宿舍服務實務指引，但係呢一個7頁長嘅服務指引呢，只係簡單咁展示特殊學校宿舍部喺營運同埋管理方面原則嘅方向，並冇針對智障兒童喺嘅情況而制定宿舍部有關於起居飲食啦、照料啦、護理兒童方面所需要注意嘅事項，亦都冇為宿舍部日常運作定明詳細嘅計劃或者基本嘅要求。我哋認為教育局咧應該針對寄宿智障兒童情況去加強實務指引嘅內容， 並且為宿舍部部分基本嘅運作作制定一啲規定，特別有關於宿生日常護理同埋記錄方面呢，從而去規管宿舍部嘅運作，提升服務水平，以保障寄宿智障兒童嘅權益。第二係有關於閉路電視嘅監察系統。而家咧，所有嘅智障兒童學校嘅宿舍部咧，已經係自發安裝咗閉路電視嘅監察系統。但係我哋嘅調查發現咧，教育局咧以往並冇抽查宿舍部嘅閉路電視錄影片段。我哋認為咧，為防範未然，以及當有懷疑失當嘅個案嘅時候，能夠有效跟進，教育局咧應該係喺符合個人資料私隱條例規定之下咧，規定智障兒童學校宿舍部咧係需要設置有錄影功能嘅閉路電視系統，以及咧定期抽查電視錄影嘅片段呢個安排。而教育局本身呢，亦都應該不時派員去抽查有關嘅片段。第三係有關於使用身體約束物或者係隔離嘅情況。部分寄宿智障兒童咧，基於治療或者健康嘅需要，會使用保護性或者醫療性嘅身體約束物。另外，如果寄宿智障兒童出現咗嚴重情緒或者行為嘅問題咧，宿舍部嘅人員可以使用身體約束物或者係隔離嘅，以免佢哋傷害自己或者係其他人。雖然使用身體約束物或者係隔離嘅措施咧，一般係由專業人士去建議，而且係獲得家長嘅同意。但係我哋認為，為咗保障相關寄宿兒童嘅安全，教育局咧應該加強監察寄宿智障兒童被使用身體約束物或者係被隔離嘅情況。包括喺巡視宿舍嘅時候去檢視宿生係被使用身體約束物或者係隔離嘅情況，並針對以約束或者係隔離作為處理寄宿智障兒童嘅情緒或者行為嘅措施，制定詳細同埋嚴謹嘅基本指引，要求學校去遵行。第四呢係關於校本管理政策下教育局安排嘅校評。咁呢啲外評呢，我哋發現呢喺智障兒童嘅學校進行嘅既定程序裏邊呢，係唔包括巡視宿舍部嘅。我哋認為教育局應該係將觀察智障兒童學校宿舍部嘅環境以及宿生嘅生活情況納入為外評嘅項目，令到外評隊呢去更加了解宿舍部如何去配合學校嘅規劃同發展，從而向學校提出改善建議。第五係有關於教育局人員日常巡視宿舍部嘅工作。除咗外評之外呢，教育局人員亦都會巡視各智障兒童學校宿舍部嘅，但係頻次呢就係疏落。巡查嘅內容呢，亦都冇聚焦去評估宿生嘅起居生活情況。我哋認為教育局呢應該加強巡視智障兒童學校宿舍部，並且咧係擴闊巡視嘅內容，以及係定明巡視嘅分工安排。此外，我哋認為教育局應該係安排人員呢同埋外評隊伍喺宿舍部巡視嘅時候，可以加入保健衛生同埋社會工作方面有資歷嘅人員，亦都可以研討係咪俾家長參與呢一個巡視宿舍部可能，讓各持份者喺唔同嘅角度評估宿舍部嘅服務質素。最後係有關於校方情報宿舍部發生嘅嚴重或者係危及生命意外事故嘅機制。教育局喺學校行政手冊定明呢，資助學校包括附設宿舍部嘅智障兒童學校呢，如果有發生任何嚴重或者危害生命嘅意外事故呢，佢哋應該立即通知家長同埋教育局，並提交書面嘅報告。但係我哋注意到有智障兒童學校呢，多次延誤向教育局報告宿舍部嘅事故，其中有一宗事故係甚至喺發生超過3年先向教育局呈報嘅。 嚴重違反咗教育局嘅指引。我哋認為教育局應該定明智障兒童學校宿舍部提交意外事故書面報告嘅限期，並且積極去監察宿舍部有冇拖誤延報。基於以上嘅調查所得，我哋向教育局提出咗12項嘅建議，教育局大致上接納咗我哋提出嘅建議。最後，我想再次強調呢，我哋唔係質疑個別智障兒童學校宿舍部嘅運作，或者係個別人員嘅行為操守。另外喺我哋調查期間呢，本處嘅人員一共去咗6間嘅智障兒童學校宿舍部參觀，我哋好多謝相關嘅學校嘅配合。Today we are going to announce the results of our direct investigation into the monitoring of the boarding sessions of schools for children with intellectual disability by the Education Bureau, EDB. In Hong Kong, there are now 17 schools for children with intellectual disabilities having boarding sessions that provide boarding service to children with moderate or severe intellectual disabilities. The boarding sessions are subsidized by the EDB. Just like other aided schools, the operation and management of those schools, including their boarding sessions, are overseen by the Incorporated Management Committee of the school in accordance with the school-based management principles. EDB monitors the schools and their boarding sessions in various aspects to ensure that the governance and operation comply with the relevant legislation and EDB guidelines. The boarders with intellectual disabilities rely on others in their daily and medical care. Given their limited ability to communicate effectively with others, they may not be able to explain clearly the situation and discontentment to their parents or others when they encountered difficulties and problems in boarding sessions. We do not doubt the devotion of those who take care of the children with intellectual disabilities in boarding sessions, and we understand the hardships involved. However, given the special circumstances of the boarders with intellectual disabilities, the service nature and arrangements at the boarding sessions are completely different from those at other schools. While the sector in general has exercised self-discipline, it does not mean that the authority can make light of its monitoring responsibilities. We understand that under the school-based management policy, schools are provided with greater flexibility and autonomy in terms of management and operation, including their boarding sessions. But EDB should step up the monitoring of the boarding session of schools of children with intellectual disabilities. This can help ensure and enhance the service quality of the boarding sessions of schools for children with intellectual disabilities, and would in turn reduce the risk of boarders with intellectual disabilities from being neglected or abused. Our investigations find that EDB had not performed their monitoring role effectively in the past. We consider that there is room for improvement. I'm going to highlight some key points. First of all, EDB's guideline on the day-to-day operation of the boarding session of schools for children with intellectual disabilities are inadequate. In the past, EDB had not issued any guidelines specifically for the operation of the boarding sessions of schools for children with intellectual disabilities. In March 2021, EDB promulgated the Practice Guide for Special Schools on Planning and Managing Boarding Service. Nonetheless, the practice guide, being only 7 pages long, just describes in very broad terms the principles and direction of operation and managing the boarding session of special schools. It does not include any important points that the boarding session of school must heed to with respect to the daily care and nursing of children with intellectual disabilities. Besides, it has not set out detailed and uniform basic requirements on the day-to-day operation of boarding sessions. We consider that EDB should take into consideration the circumstances of boarders with intellectual disabilities and enhance the content of the practice guide. It should also formulate uniform requirements for certain aspects in the basic operation of the boarding sessions, especially in aspects relating to the daily care of boarders and record keeping. Secondly, it is about closed-circuit television, CCTV surveillance systems. All the boarding sessions of schools for children with intellectual disabilities have already taken the initiative to install CCTV surveillance systems. Our investigation, however, has found that in the past, EDB had never conducted random checks of the recorded footages of the CCTV systems of the boarding sections. As a preemptive measure and for effective follow-up actions on suspicious improprieties, we consider that so long as the Personal Data Privacy Ordinance is complied with, EDB should require the boarding session of schools for children with intellectual disabilities to install CCTV system with recording functions and random check the recording footages regularly. EDB should also arrange staff to conduct random checks of their footages from time to time. Thirdly, we have some observations relating to the use of physical restraint or seclusion. Some boarders with intellectual disabilities may need protective or medical physical restraint as a treatment or on health grounds. On the other hand, staff of the boarding session may apply physical restraint or seclusion to boarders who display serious emotional or behavioral problems so as to prevent the boarders or others from being harmed. Although the use of physical restraint or seclusion is generally recommended by professionals and with parents' consent, we consider that for the safety of the boarders, EDB should strengthen monitoring of the use of such interventions in the boarding sessions. For instance, EDB officers can review the use of physical restraint or seclusion during inspections at the boarding sessions. The Bureau can also formulate detailed and rigorous basic guidelines for using restraint or seclusion as a measure to tackle emotional or behavioral problems of the boarders with intellectual disabilities. Schools should be required to comply with the guidelines. The fourth point is about EDB's external school review under the school-based management policy. We find that external school reviews at the schools for children with intellectual disabilities do not cover inspection at their boarding sessions in the process. Our view is that EDB should include observation of the environment of the boarding sessions and the daily routine of the boarders as part of the external reviews. In this way, the external review teams can understand better how the boarding sessions can complement the planning and development of the schools and make improvement recommendations as necessary. The fifth point is about the inspection of EDB officers. Inspection work of the EDB officers. Besides external school reviews, EDB officers also conduct inspections from time to time at the boarding session of schools for children with intellectual disabilities. However, those inspections were very infrequent, and the inspections had not focused on assessing the daily lives and routine of the boarders. We consider that EDB should strengthen inspections at the boarding session of those schools, broaden the coverage of the inspections, and devise a clear delineation of the inspection duties. In addition, the inspection and external review teams can include professionals with qualifications in healthcare and social work. Moreover, EDB can also explore the feasibility of allowing parents of boarders to participate in the inspections at the boarding sessions so that different stakeholders can assess the service quality of the boarding sessions from different perspectives. Last but not least, it is about the mechanism for schools to report serious or life-threatening accidents that have happened in boarding sessions. The school administrative guide issued by the EDB stipulates that aided schools, including schools for children with intellectual disabilities, having a boarding session, have to report serious or life-threatening accidents to the parents and EDB immediately. They must also submit written reports on accidents. Nevertheless, we noticed that a school for children with intellectual disabilities had repeatedly and seriously delayed reporting to EDB about the accidents that had happened in its boarding session. One of the accidents was only reported to the Bureau 3 years later, constituting a serious breach of the EDB guidelines. We consider it imperative of EDB to set a clear deadline for the boarding session of schools for children with intellectual disability to submit written reports on accidents and monitor closely whether there has been any delay in reporting the incidents. In light of our findings, we have made 12 recommendations to the EDB. The Bureau in general has accepted our recommendations. Finally, I wish to stress that we are not doubting the operation of any particular boarding sessions of schools for children with intellectual disability or the integrity of individual staff members. During the course of our investigation, our officers have visited the boarding sessions of 6 schools for children with intellectual disabilities. We would like to express our gratitude to those schools for their facilitation. Thank you. 跟住我會將時間交俾負責呢個主動調查個案嘅調查主任温慧瑩。
唔該，專員，各位早晨。今日我要報告嘅主動調查係教育局對智障兒童學校宿舍部嘅監管。我會先講解背景資料，之後係本處嘅調查所得同埋建議。首先係背景資料。輕度、中度同埋嚴重智障程度嘅兒童可以入讀教育局資助嘅智障兒童學校。除咗提供教育之外，部分受教育局資助嘅智障兒童學校設有宿舍部，提供寄宿服務俾就讀有關學校並且係符合寄宿準則嘅中度或者嚴重智障兒童。宿舍部喺非上課時段會為寄宿智障兒童提供個人照顧服務，亦都透過規律嘅生活培訓同埋多元化嘅活動，協助佢哋發展自理能力同埋社交技巧。截至2022年嘅9月，香港有17所附設宿舍部嘅智障兒童學校，有大概700幾名嘅宿生。智障兒童學校宿舍部嘅管理同埋監管工作係屬於學校嘅日常運作，按校本管理政策由學校負責。教育局由唔同嘅層面去監管學校同埋宿舍部嘅營辦質素。對於附設宿舍部嘅學校，教育局嘅監管工作係以整所學校作為基礎。為咗協助特殊學校更加有系統咁策劃同埋管理宿舍部嘅服務，教育局喺2021年嘅3月編定咗特殊學校策劃和管理宿舍服務實務指引，以下簡稱實務指引嘅試用版本，並且喺2020-21學年試行。2021年嘅9月，教育局考慮咗學校嘅意見之後，修訂咗實務指引，並且納入學校行政手冊，俾學校喺2021-22學年起遵行。喺呢次主動調查，我哋認為教育局喺7個方面有不足之處。首先係對智障兒童學校宿舍部日常運作嘅指引不足。喺2021年3月之前，教育局冇針對智障兒童學校宿舍部嘅營運同埋管理發出指引，只係由學校自行根據法例同埋教育局嘅指引去制定相關嘅校本指引。但係相關嘅法例同埋教育局嘅指引，對於智障兒童學校宿舍部嘅日常運作、個人照顧同埋護理服務、生活流程安排以及係需備存嘅記錄等等嘅事宜亦都冇詳細嘅規定。2021年嘅3月，教育局為特殊學校宿舍部編製實務指引，但係實務指引嘅對象係唔同特殊學校嘅宿舍部，例如視障或者肢體傷殘兒童學校宿舍部。雖然近70%呢啲嘅特殊學校嘅宿生係屬於中度同埋嚴重嘅智障兒童，但係實務指引係冇針對智障兒童嘅情況去定明宿舍部喺起居照料同埋護理方面需要注意嘅事項同埋要遵從嘅程序。另外，長僅7頁嘅實務指引只係好概括咁展示營運同埋管理特殊學校宿舍部嘅原則同埋方向。除咗宿舍部晚間嘅最低當值人手之外係冇為其他日常運作定明詳細同埋劃一嘅基本要求。我哋認為教育局應該針對寄宿智障兒童嘅情況，加強實務指引嘅內容，並且為宿舍部嘅部分日常運作定明基本嘅要求，特別係日常護理同埋記錄方面。要求各智障兒童學校嘅宿舍部必須要將部分嘅呢啲基本要求納入去學校自行制定嘅校本指引裡面。第二係未有強制智障兒童學校宿舍部設置具錄影功能嘅閉路電視監察系統同埋抽查錄影片段。教育局未有強制智障兒童學校喺宿舍範圍安裝具錄影功能嘅閉路電視系統，亦都冇提供安裝資助。以往亦都唔掌握宿舍部安裝同埋使用閉路電視監察系統嘅情況。直至2022年嘅10月，教育局先至向資助特殊學校，包括附設宿舍部嘅智障兒童學校，去搜集宿舍部安裝閉路電視監察系統嘅資料。現時所有嘅智障兒童學校嘅宿舍部都有安裝閉路電視監察系統，而我哋注意到 教育局咧係未有抽查智障兒童學校宿舍部嘅閉路電視錄影片段。我哋認為教育局應該定智障兒童學校需要喺宿舍部嘅範圍裡面設置具錄影功能嘅閉路電視系統，同埋定期抽查錄影片段嘅安排。喺有需要嘅時候提供額外嘅安裝資助。而教育局咧亦都應該不時派員去抽查有關嘅錄影片段。第三係對智障兒童喺宿舍部被使用身體約束物同埋隔離嘅情況欠缺系統性嘅監察。個別寄宿智障兒童咧係需要使用保護性或者醫療性嘅身體約束物，例如係特別椅、手冊同埋安全帽，去防止佢哋受傷。另外，寄宿智障兒童咧，如果出現嚴重失控嘅情緒或者行為嘅時候咧，都會需要向佢哋使用身體約束物，例如係約束帶、約束衣、零水椅同埋安全椅，或者係透過隔離咧嚟限制活動範圍，避免佢哋傷害自己或者其他人。喺呢方面，教育局發出咗使用約束或隔離的方法處理有特殊教育需要學生嚴重情緒行為問題的指引，以下簡稱約束或隔離指引。學校咧係需要透過跨專業個案會議去詳細討論，並且係獲得家長嘅書面同意之後咧，先可以喺學生出現嚴重嘅情緒同埋行為問題嘅時候，用身體約束物或者隔離作為緊急嘅管教措施。不過，如果有突發事故發生，例如學生嘅行為問題極有可能構成安全嘅威脅，即使係未獲家長同意，學校都可以按專業嘅判斷，緊急用身體約束物或者隔離嚟制止學童嘅嚴重情緒同埋行為問題。我哋留意到，教育局係冇備存被使用身體約束物或者隔離嘅寄宿智障兒童數目同埋個案詳情。而教育局人員以往去宿舍部嘅時候咧，亦都冇抽查有需要使用身體約束物或者隔離嘅宿生情況。另一方面，我哋注意到約束或隔離指引呢，只係提供一般嘅原則、程序同埋注意事項，並唔係針對寄宿智障兒童而設嘅。教育局雖然有鼓勵智障兒童學校宿舍部去制定使用身體約束物同埋隔離嘅校本指引同埋監察機制，但係冇要求佢哋呈交相關嘅指引同埋機制。雖然約束或隔離指引提示學校使用嘅身體約束物品同埋隔離嘅場所必須要係人道，而教育局喺規劃興建學校同埋宿舍部嘅時候咧，亦都冇預設作為隔離用途嘅空間。但係約束或隔離指引咧係冇為設置隔離空間嘅設計同埋設備咧去訂立規定嘅。我哋認為教育局對智障兒童學校宿舍部嘅監管應該涵蓋使用身體約束物或者隔離嘅工作，確保並且提醒宿舍部嘅人員謹慎同埋正確咁進行相關嘅程序。教育局亦都應該針對寄宿智障兒童嘅特殊情況，而為宿舍部去制定詳細同埋嚴謹嘅基本指引，包括係執行程序同埋監管機制，例如去訂立鬆綁身體約束物嘅間隔時間、觀察宿生反應嘅頻率等等。教育局亦都應該為隔離空間去制定設計同埋配置嘅基本要求，確保有關嘅環境係安全同埋人道。第四點係未有指示校外評核，以下簡稱外評嘅隊伍觀察同埋評估宿舍部嘅生活同埋情況。一如其他嘅公營學校同埋直接資助學校，附設宿舍部嘅智障兒童學校係需要透過定期嘅自我評估，以下簡稱自評，去檢視發展優次同埋重點工作嘅成效。教育局會透過外評去核實學校嘅自評效能，協助學校去反思工作成效同埋持續發展。教育局強調恆常嘅學校管理，包括宿舍部嘅運作，係屬於校本管理嘅範疇。我哋留意到外評嘅既定程序並唔包括巡視宿舍部，而根據部分嘅外評報告，我哋發現有外評嘅隊伍曾經觀察智障兒童學校宿舍部嘅生活流程，例如係智障兒童喺宿舍部進食同埋作息安排。但係有啲外評報告就冇提及有冇去觀察宿生嘅生活流程，或者有冇同社監面談。由此可見外評似乎並唔係倉劃一嘅程序。我哋認為教育局應該將巡視智障兒童學校宿舍部嘅環境同埋宿生嘅生活情況納入為外評項目嘅其中一環，等外評嘅隊伍可以了解宿舍部點樣配合學校嘅規劃同埋發展，從而向學校提出改善嘅建議。第五點係巡視宿舍部嘅成效存疑。附設宿舍部嘅智障兒童學校主要係由教育局嘅學校發展分部同埋特殊教育分部嘅人員去探訪。學校發展分部有18個按地區劃分嘅學校發展組，負責監察同埋支援當區學校嘅辦學同埋教學情況，去促進學校嘅發展。 教育局表示，對於附設宿舍部嘅智障兒童學校嘅監管工作，同一般嘅普通學校係無異嘅，都係屬於地區性嘅教育發展嘅事宜。至於特殊教育分部，就有職員專職負責資助特殊學校嘅事宜，包括係特殊學校嘅人手安排同埋資助、轉介同埋學位安排等等。特殊教育分部探訪呢啲附設宿舍部嘅智障兒童學校，主要嘅目的係提供專業嘅支援，例如聽力服務、言語治療服務同埋教育心理服務，或者係了解學校運用教育局額外發放津貼嘅情況，會按需要去探訪宿舍部。學校發展分部同埋特殊教育分部探訪或者巡視智障兒童學校前呢，都會預先通知相關嘅學校。而我哋留意到呢兩個分部巡視宿舍部嘅次數係偏低。舉例嚟講，喺2018-19學年，兩個分部合共探訪附設宿舍部嘅智障兒童學校54次，但當中只係有11次係有巡視到宿舍部。教育局指大部分嘅探訪係為咗提供專業嘅支援服務同埋諮詢，所以係冇需要去到訪宿舍部。而喺2019冠狀病毒病疫情之下，2019-20學年探訪嘅次數亦都受到影響。另外，我哋留意到教育局巡視各間智障兒童學校宿舍部嘅頻率係非常疏落。例如喺2017-18至到2019-20學年，被巡視嘅智障兒童學校宿舍部每個學年係6至9間不等。有一間學校嘅宿舍部喺同一個學年裡面，因為特別嘅情況，例如係調查投訴同埋處理校舍重置嘅事宜，被巡視過3次。亦都有2間嘅宿舍部係連續3個學年都未被巡視過。2021年3月推出咗實務指引之後，學校發展分部同埋特殊教育分部由2020-21學年開始聯合去巡視特殊學校嘅宿舍部，去收集業界嘅意見同埋檢視實務指引，並且監察宿舍部嘅運作。聯合巡視係事先預約進行嘅。喺巡視嘅時候，學校發展分部主要係關注學校嘅發展同埋行政嘅事宜。而特殊教育分部就會係着重了解同埋收集學校喺執行實務指引嘅經驗同埋意見。不過，我哋留意到喺實務指引發出1年之內，即係2021年4月至到2022年嘅4月，兩個分部只係巡視咗8所嘅智障兒童學校嘅宿舍部各1次，頻率未見顯著提升。直至我哋公佈展開主動調查之後，教育局先至增加咗巡查智障兒童學校宿舍部嘅次數。我哋認為教育局應該積極增加巡視嘅頻次，亦都應該安排喺唔同嘅時段突擊巡視智障兒童學校嘅宿舍部。另外，我哋認為教育局有必要檢討同埋擴闊巡視智障兒童學校宿舍部嘅內容，聚焦喺評估宿舍部嘅生活流程，觀察寄宿智障兒童身心嘅健康同埋情緒行為，同埋審核相關嘅護理、約束或者隔離嘅記錄。教育局亦都應該為特殊教育分部同埋學校發展分部就巡視學校，包括係聯合巡視，制定清晰嘅分工同埋指標。第6點係巡視宿舍部人員嘅資歷單一。我哋注意到教育局負責巡視嘅職員同埋外評嘅隊伍並唔具備保健衛生同埋社會工作方面嘅資歷。我哋認為教育局可以考慮加入呢2方面資歷嘅人員，確保巡視工作嘅成效。另外，教育局都可以探討俾寄宿智障兒童家長參與巡視宿舍部嘅可能性，從唔同持份者嘅角度去評估宿舍部嘅服務質素。第7點係呈報宿舍部發生嘅嚴重或者危及生命意外事故嘅機制失效。根據教育局嘅規定，如果發生任何嚴重或者危及生命嘅意外事故，校長係必須要立即通知家長同埋教育局，並且係提交書面報告。2017至到2021年嘅期間，有智障兒童學校數次嚴重延誤口頭同埋書面報告宿舍部發生嘅嚴重或者係危及生命嘅意外事故。例如，事涉嘅學校喺一宗宿舍部嘅事故發生之後3年先至呈報教育局，亦都冇向教育局提交另一宗事故嘅書面報告，嚴重違反教育局嘅指引。由於教育局係冇明文規定宿舍部需要提交嚴重或者危及生命意外事故書面報告嘅期限，我哋認為教育局有必要定明提交相關書面報告嘅限期，並且係積極監察有冇拖延呈報任何嘅意外事故。基於以上嘅調查所得，我哋向教育局提出咗共12項嘅改善建議，詳情大家可以參閱翻手上面嘅報告摘要。今日我嘅報告係咁多，將時間交翻俾主持。唔該。
接住落嚟係答問嘅時間，歡迎傳媒朋友就住剛才嘅報告提出發問。好，前面呢一位。
係兩位好，咁就其實即係之前即係都有啲兒童宿舍即係都有過啲虐兒事件啦。咁其實公署認為咧，其實而家喺個嗰啲而家啲弱能學校嘅嗰啲宿舍發生嘅問題咧，其實會唔會係都係同一類嘅處理方式，或者係話即係個問題嘅類型都係咁咧？另外就係話教育局有冇解釋過話，即係佢哋係即係會咁少去巡視嗰啲宿舍個原因係乜嘢咧？即係巡學校佢哋有，但係就反而就唔係睇埋啲宿舍，係有冇特別解釋到係話即係點解咧？唔該。
喺我哋呢個調查裏邊呢，我哋睇到呢，就教育局呢，就以往呢，就唔係咁積極去監管呢有關於智障兒童學校宿舍部嘅運作，尤其呢係有關於佢日常生活或者係佢哋嗰個規範係點樣樣嘅。咁可能呢係同教育局呢以翻呢個校本管理嘅原則，就俾翻呢個學校本身嘅校董會咧，係去作呢個嘅安排同埋監管。喺我哋嘅角度嚟睇咧，應該咧教育局咧係更加積極採取一啲預防嘅措施，去保障呢啲寄宿嘅智障兒童喺佢哋嘅福祉啊。尤其咧係喺翻規範化呢個監管嗰個機制啦，同埋咧係嗰啲細節啊。咁頭先所講咧，喺其他嘅譬如話殘疾院舍啊，或者留宿幼兒中心嗰啲規管咧，就係由呢一個社會福利署係去做嘅嚇。咁亦都有相關嘅指引啦嚇，咁同埋咧係監管嘅情況。喺教育局嚟講咧，就係最主要喺翻學校嗰方面嘅我哋而家今次睇咧，就係嗰個寄宿嘅智障兒童學校嘅宿舍部，希望咧教育局喺呢一方面咧，亦都增加佢哋嘅監管嘅工作。多謝。
後面嗰一位。
你好，TVB 嘅，想問一問咧，頭先都講到話機制失效嗰度，其中一單個案3年之後先呈報，想問嗰間學校而家仲有冇繼續係營運緊嘅？可唔可以透露係邊一間學校？同埋剛才講到就係話嗰個其他即係例如兒童學校屬於社署嗰啲咁樣，公署可唔可以建議即係話叫做即係將你哋今次呢啲建議可以擴展去到呢啲學校其實都適用咧？可唔可以咁樣解讀？唔該。
今次咧，我哋嘅調查咧，最主要係有關於教育局咧係規管呢一個智障兒童學校宿舍部嘅情況，就唔係咧調查咧就個別嘅智障兒童學校啊。咁亦都因為私隱原因咧，我哋就唔會去個別去評論公佈有關於個學校嘅。咁但係我可以講到咧，就喺呢一單個案之中咧，就教育局咧就係有即時去口頭訓示咗呢間學校啦，亦都出咗呢個書面嘅警告書俾佢，要求咧學校法團校董會咧係作出改善嘅方案啦，同埋咧就係提交報告俾教育局嘅嚇。咁頭先你所提及咧係有關於其他兒童住宿，即係話係由社會福利署去監管嘅呢啲宿舍係嘛？嗰啲咁嘅指引啦，同埋佢哋最近咧亦都做咗一個檢討報告嘅啊。咁咧就我哋亦都有參考過有關嘅檢討報告嘅，有一啲方面咧，佢覺得咧係值得教育局去借鏡嘅。而呢個檢討報告本身咧，其實咧係冇包括埋教育局管理底下嘅呢啲智障兒童學校嘅。咁我哋今次呢一個主動調查咧，正咧就係針對呢一方面去作出呢一個填補啦。咁同埋亦都希望咧教育局喺呢一方面咧更加着力嘅。多謝。
Hi, 2 questions from RTHK. So I'd like to ask about the inspection, the frequency of inspections at the boarding sections, because you said in your investigation some of the sections have been inspected like 3 times in a year, while some others were not inspected in 3 academic years. So is there any explanation from the EB why there's such a discrepancy? And about the in reporting an incident? Because you said one of the schools only reported the incident after 3 years. So is there any explanation? And what has the EDB been doing to follow up on this case? Thank you.
Currently, for the external review of the EDB on schools, there is no mandatory requirement for them to inspect the boarding sessions of the special school. So that is one of the reasons why we highlight this point and ask the EDB to actually enhance the guidelines and requirements in respect of the inspection and include such in the external review. And also, EDB also explained that the variation in terms of the frequency of visits has to do with the purposes of each of the visits. Sometimes it's to do with the related complaints or the development of the schools. That's why some schools have more visits by the EDB officers, where others do not have. But on the whole, the inspection of the boarding session of special school are not a mandatory requirement in the visit of the EDB officers. Hence, our recommendation for them to improve that. As for the incident where there is the delay in the reporting of the accident, even up to 3 years, we understand that EDB has issued both verbal and written warnings to the school concerned and required the school to provide an improvement plan together with the incorporated management of the school so that such recurrence will be avoided. Thank you.
係呢邊呢一位。
係你好，讀媒嘅。咁想追問翻頭先公署認為即係可以參考翻社署嗰個評估，咁教育局其實有邊啲方面都可以借鏡翻呢一個報告咧？咁另外就係即係22年10月嘅時候，教育局搜集咗即係安裝閉路電視嘅嗰個資料啦。咁有冇一個結果或者數據？其實之前係有幾多間學校係冇閉路電視咧？咁最尾就係即係公署都建議即係外評項目加翻巡視宿舍部啦，咁同埋教育局都巡視同埋突擊宿舍部啦。咁其實呢兩邊嘅巡視會有啲咩分別咁樣嘅？唔該。
借鏡嗰方面呢，其實係最主要係豐富翻佢嗰個實務指引。而家實務指引呢，就係好多呢係有關於原則性或者方向性嘅，但係我哋覺得呢，喺照顧智障兒童喺宿舍部裏邊呢，有啲規範呢係可以有更多嘅細節嘅。例如呢，就係話佢哋嗰個起居飲食嗰個規範同埋佢記錄啦。用嗰個閉路電視嘅系統點樣可以咧，就係抽查去評估翻有冇一啲不當嘅行為啦，或者係用呢一個約束物嘅時候，或者係將佢隔離嘅時候嗰個細節安排啦。譬如話係用呢個約束物係可以用幾耐啦，幾耐係需要再去翻去巡查啦。呢一啲咁嘅細節咧，其實而家喺個實務指引裏邊咧比較籠統嘅。咁我覺得咧喺呢一方面係可以借鏡嘅。喺閉路電視嗰個系統嗰方面，喺我哋調查嗰陣時咧，教育局咧佢哋本身就唔係好掌握究竟呢啲智障兒童學校宿舍部咧係有冇安裝到或者安裝嘅情況嘅。咁後來咧得知道咧係其實咧所有嘅智障兒童學校嘅宿舍部咧喺調查嗰個期間咧，其實佢哋已經自發咧就安裝咗呢一啲嘅閉路電視㗎啦。咁但係咧就安裝嘅情況咧係有異啦，亦都有一啲咧未必有呢一個錄影嘅功能，亦都睇唔到話有抽查呢個錄影片段嘅呢一個動作。咁所以咧我哋就俾個提議咧，就係話教育局咧喺呢一方面咧應該係有個規範化。就係話嗰啲智障兒童學校宿舍部咧，應該咧係安裝呢一個閉路電視系統，亦都係應該係有錄影嘅功能，同埋咧學校咧應該係不時咧係要去抽查翻呢啲咁嘅片段啦。而喺教育局佢哋去巡視呢啲學校嘅宿舍部嘅時候咧，亦都應該咧係去抽查呢啲咁嘅錄影嘅片段嘅。 至於巡視嗰方面咧，頭先我哋講咗啦，就希望咧就係話喺校評嗰方面，即係外評嗰方面咧，就係增加咗話呢一個巡視智障兒童學校宿舍部咧，係為其中一個需要去巡查嘅目標嚇，同埋咧就係巡查嘅內容係咩嘢都應該係有規範化嘅。咁其他嗰啲突擊嗰啲咧，或者係其他發展部啊嗰個巡查咧，我哋應該咧，我哋亦都咧希望咧教育局咧去理清佢哋嘅大家嘅目的啦，佢哋各自分配嘅責任啦，同埋聯合去一齊做嘅時個協同效應係點樣啦？咁呢啲都係我哋嘅建議嘅。多謝。
好多謝各位出席我哋今日嘅新聞發佈會。發佈會到呢一度完結啦。